is Joan Donovan. I'm a professor of journalism over at the Berkman Klein Center. No, sorry, that's where we are. That's the sponsor of this event. Over at Boston University. To my one side here is Professor Lawrence Lessig, sometimes called Larry. Also has written some amazing work and been involved in a couple of excellent documentaries, one of which I'm a big fan of, called The Internet's Own Boy. So if you're interested in more information on a topic like this, please check that one out. And then over here is a stranger. Showed up, walked in. I was like, well, come on in. This is director Alex Winter, who put that film together miraculously pretty much throughout the pandemic. You can tell that the film is coming out of some of the more cutting-edge research on internet studies. It has some commentary about policy and where we are. It's told from a perspective not just of creators and of the business founders, but also of people who are legitimate victims of hate, harassment, and incitement online. So on Saturday, we did a great panel at UPenn where Andy Parker came and talked about what he's been doing since he had started working with Congress members to try to create new gun accountability laws, or laws against gun violence, as well as deal with issues related to what you saw in the film in terms of getting the content taken down of the murder of his daughter. And so it was a very interesting interview, and also Andy is someone that you can look up online. He does a lot of writing, and he has a book about his daughter. So Larry, I want to go to you first and just get some general reaction: shock, horror, pain. But there was some gleeful moments. There was, that baby.
He knows all this already.
But I'd love to hear from your perspective what kind of memories it dredged up for you.
Well, I think it just reinforced a point that is terrifying to recognize, and that is we have no capacity to govern in the United States. I mean, I met these guys, I knew these guys at the birth of YouTube, at the birth of Google. I remember going into Larry Page's cubicle and him telling me about the future of what Google would be. None of these people had any clue about how this would develop. None of them understood what advertising would be. They had no conception of AI-driven targeting. This was not anywhere in their vision. What they had was an objective to figure out how to use technology to make money. And that's what they did. They figured out these extraordinary technologies of AI that understand how to exploit your weaknesses, our psychological weaknesses, the way the fast food industry is able to exploit our eating weaknesses. But this is much more dangerous because it takes us into places we don't even recognize we're being walked into. And so, it's a company trying to make money, producing great harm to society. You would think there's a thing called government that might step up and say, what should we do in response? But the reality is our government's completely captured. Like, there's just zero chance that they will step up and do anything in response to this because of the enormous amount of money that gets channeled. And I'll tell you a particularly depressing, because I love her as a representative, example of this. Just after all of the TikTok scare was blowing up and people were recognizing the vulnerability of the nation from this platform and what it was doing to whole swaths of our society. And people were calling on governments to regulate, to do something about this platform, and states like Montana started doing something. AOC launched her first TikTok video. And the TikTok video was her describing how it would be unfair to regulate TikTok when we had not passed privacy legislation in the United States. Which signaled, number one, she didn't understand what the problem was. But more importantly to me, it signaled that the Democratic Party had the channels open of endless money from technology companies, and they were no longer going to be in the fight to do something about these technologies. So this is a horrible story even though it includes some of the most inspirational people I can imagine. It's the best, as Aaron says in that movie. The internet's the best and the worst, both, right? It's both together. But I fear the worst begins to dominate as this underlying business model runs over everything, and you don't have governance model to resist it.
Yeah, that's it. I think the business model is an important part of the story, both when it comes to YouTube and the monetization of content, that also fuels some of the, and literally funds, hate, harassment, and incitement. But this was a value, paying content creators, that was largely pushed by progressives and the left. Early on, when people were making content for YouTube and not getting anything back. YouTube was taking everything. Now they take something like 30% of everything. And the stuff that I was researching when I was at Data and Society in a report with Becca Lewis on the Alternative Influence Network, what we were trying to show clearly was how hate traveled through YouTube, and many of the people in the documentary are in that report. And that report was really about showing YouTube how small the problem really was. It was about 80 white supremacists that were spread across hundreds of channels, because they would say anything and super chats would roll in, or other kinds of monetization would happen. And just like Faraday Speaks, which is the young man that had fallen down the alt-right, Caleb, he had fallen down the alt-right pipeline. He was looking for content where the left were debating the right. And he was in some of the left tube or bread tube YouTubers that he had quoted, like Destiny, or we saw ContraPoints in the film, really had a distinct point of view, because they didn't back away from talking to people on the right. But at the same time, what it did is it raised the profile of a bunch of people that probably would have been left to obscurity on YouTube. And so I want to talk to you about the choices you had to make in editing so that you could capture the vitriol without giving them
more of a platform.
Exactly.
Yeah, obviously something I was thinking a lot about. You know, I don't like centering terrible people. And just giving them, that's why there's a, you know, we focused on a few people, and there are certain people like Molyneux who you can't not talk about because he's so significant, and especially in his role in the Christchurch shooting. But you know, Crowder was important to show, and I think that for me, something that you both said was kind of, you know, not that we have a thesis, I mean we kind of do, we sort of hide it, we bury it as well as we possibly can so the film doesn't get preachy, but you know, I was sort of intent on kind of getting away from this discourse around algorithms, which I think is intentionally obfuscating. And I was trying to focus more on business model, which is just much more a human incentive, an understandable one, and it's one you can't wriggle out from around. So that also had a lot to do with who I wanted to focus on, because people like Crowder, those people, you know, you were talking about voices that were raised up, and that we saw a lot of that happen with Gamergate, which is why I spent time on Gamergate. I remember when I was sort of very immersed in that when it was happening, it was evident that there were powers in the background that had figured out they could weaponize sort of the rise of this disenfranchised, mostly white, younger male, right, and actually quasi-organize them even without them knowing they were being organized. And so to a degree you had some people who got elevated like by that, but then you had a lot of dark money and other sort of finance interests specifically funding individual groups that then got hyper promoted by YouTube because they were connecting with so many people and monetized. So it was that gas on the fire of like a far right ideological group with a lot of money funds a Crowder channel. That channel starts to do well. YouTube kicks in with their business model and proliferates that around the world. And so I was wanting to focus on enough of those to make that point clear. I think I had a guy, I can't remember, there was one of the ones you were at. It's a bit of a blur, this bus and truck tour I'm on. But someone asked me the other night, I think it was at UPenn, like what the difference was between the sort of the Fox News effect and the YouTube effect. And that's the difference, is you know, you can have Molyneux sort of calling for Muslims to be slaughtered, and they get slaughtered, and you know, they deplatform him, but this information is everywhere, it's all over the world. And even Fox News, even Fox News' standards and practices, even though it's not particularly well followed, but it proliferates in a completely different way. Going back a little bit to what Becca Lewis and you were talking about from Data and Society, which is why I sought out Becca, which is the parasocial component and the idea that you are connecting with someone through webcam, eyeball to eyeball. The power that has is really not comparable to like Sean Hannity in a suit talking to someone who's already on his side. And then you spread that by 4.6 billion video views a day all over the world into every home, left, right, center, and otherwise. And there's a potential to radicalize there that I think far exceeds the potential to radicalize on Fox. So that was sort of the other thing that I wanted to focus on in terms of who we showed and who we didn't. But it was tricky, for sure.